Hi, everybody. This is Uma from Women's March Global. I am pleased to be with you today along with our fantastic chapter representatives and ambassadors from Women's March Frankfurt. This is our second webinar for our Global Open House, and we are really excited to share with you what our fantastic chapter ambassadors from Frankfurt are doing. Before that, I just want to share a little bit about Women's March Global and jump into what we are going to be talking about on this webinar. So in just 1 second here. So I want to just quickly present a little bit about Women's March Global and tell you about who we are. This is a week-long session that we're holding called the Global Open House. And every single day, we're coming to you to share different aspects of Women's March Global and who we are as an organization. We have with us today Michaela and Emily from Women's March Frankfurt, and I'll get to them in just a little bit so they can introduce themselves. But just so you all are aware of who we are at Women's March Global, Women's March Global is an inclusive, diverse, flexible, and transparent global community and a digital platform that empowers and enables activists to take action. We work within a framework called the HERS framework, which stands for health, economic security, representation, and safety. And our work is really guided by these 4 pillars of the HERS framework, tackling the key issues within each of these pillars. And we do this work at a local level and a grassroots level through our amazing global community of chapters and members and also coalitions. And we have here a great representation of that today, Women's March Frankfurt. We are fulfilling this mission through this 2-pronged approach that leverages both on-the-ground direct support through our local chapters and organizations, but also through campaigns, which you will be able to learn about later on in the week. So with that said, I would love to share with you our webinar agenda. So you're going to meet Women's March Frankfurt and Emily and Michaela from Frankfurt. And then we're going to talk about the issues that they are seeing on the ground as local activists and our chapter ambassadors. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Emily and Michaela from Women's March Frankfurt. So if you would both like to introduce yourselves, then that would be great.
So who's starting? Okay, I guess I am starting. My name is Emina Aslan. I'm from Frankfurt. I live here, I study here for a few years now. Student of sociology, and I would describe myself as an academic activist, meaning that I try to bridge the academic parts of my life that is being focused on post-colonial theories, intersectional feminism, and anti-racism with the grassroots activism that I'm doing locally in Frankfurt, as well as in cooperation with other activists all across the country. And yeah, that's basically a very short notice what I'm doing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing. Michaela, could you please introduce yourself?
I'm a Weimar Berlin chanteuse, I guess not only the time of Weimar Berlin, where we then faced the rise of fascism and everything. I mean, that has always fascinated me, and I've also tried to communicate the injustice in my shows and everything. But last year, I joined Women's March, the global movement, and organized the first Women's March here in Frankfurt. And we are a group of 7 women and men. They greet you, hello world, from Frankfurt, and yeah, that's us here in Frankfurt.
Fantastic. So it's amazing, you know, Michaela has been with us since the very beginning in terms of Women's March Global, and Emily is an amazing academic resource that we have in Frankfurt And I would love for you to, you both to talk about your focus areas in Frankfurt and how you organize. This picture that we see up on our screen right now is a photograph from your first march that you had in 2017. So it'd be great to understand a little bit more on what you are focused on, just in a very general sense, and then we'll go into more specifics later.
Well, like I gave a speech with Magda Isaac on the first Women's March, where our main focus was intersectionality and how we need to push forward a mainstream feminist understanding for more inclusive feminism. And that is also like the main focus in our group right now in Frankfurt, because in Germany, when you think about mainstream feminism, as in a lot of other Western or so-called Western countries, it's a second wave feminism, which is not very inclusive, especially towards Black women, refugee women, Muslim women. And so our understanding is that for more just society and a more progressive feminism, we need to push that understanding more into the mainstream and try to build alliances that share the same vision as we do as feminists.
Thank you for sharing.
Also, I think, sorry, many people don't really have an understanding here in Germany anyway, and I'm sure around that gap to trying to sensibilize people to what it means to be marginalized in Germany and the hardship that it brings, and yeah, fighting for justice, so to speak.
And you know, it's great that you said that, Michaela, in terms of many people in Germany are not aware of, you know, all of the injustices that are going on. And Emily, you also touched in this in your introduction, that the feminism that we are seeing right now on an international level doesn't actually include the most marginalized communities. So it would be great to talk about what we see in regards to the rise of the far right. And as Women's March Global and our European coalitions, our European coalition is just our network of chapters within Europe. This is really a very big focus area for our European chapters in regards to really documenting, but also just observing what is happening with the rise of the far right in Europe. But if you could both talk about in regards to what is happening in Germany and what you've seen in Germany, that would be fantastic.
Well, like speaking about rise of fascism or racism in Germany is a little bit difficult because when you go back in history, actually, right, like from the beginning where the Berlin Wall fell down and people spoke about the reunited Germany, we had racist pogroms from the beginning. Like there was Rostock-Lichtenhagen in 1992 and so on. So there were the NSU complex where an underground neo-Nazi organization killed, intentionally murdered Turkish and Greek migrants in an organized way. And now we are even speaking about evidence that shows that some people who are working for the state and for the so-called Verfassungsschutz, which is like an state intelligence, have been aware of the planned racist murders during the NSU complex. So the communities of color have been talking about this rise for years now. So with what happened in Köthen and Chemnitz, suddenly the mainstream, the German mass mainstream and the mass media started to recognize that something is really fatally going wrong, right? But we have been speaking about this like for at least 5 to 10 years now.
Emily, can I just ask that you, because you brought up the recent events that have happened, but for those people that don't know what's actually transpired, could you just talk about what has taken place recently?
Yeah, so there was an argument between like 2 or 3 men and in the city of Chemnitz, which is in the eastern part of Germany. And in that argument, one person was killed, and that person was an Afro-Cuban person. But what the far right in Saxony did from about this argument about this murder was they completely erased his his German Cuban identity and acted like some foreigners, some refugees killed a white German person. So what has happened was that this argument and this death has been instrumentalized by the far right organizations in Saxony, in Eastern Germany, and people went onto the streets to demonstrate against refugees, screaming slogans like "Germany for Germans," showing the Hitler salute, being openly visible with neo-Nazi tattoos and all like that. And during this march, like several not white-looking people were attacked by these mobs of far-right people, ending up to be hurt, like really fatally hurt. And after that, we had like different discussions in the media. Some politicians were ignoring or raising the fact that we had an openly Nazi mob on the streets attacking and hunting people of color. And yeah, so the days after that, a lot of people tried to mobilize to Chemnitz and call for solidarity from the left in Germany. And then there was this big concert that was announced a week after the major neo-Nazi march in Chemnitz, where around 65,000 people showed up. But again, this was like a week later, not in a confrontation with the Nazis on the streets. It was like a solidarity concert. We can maybe like, yeah, brighten this or get into the deeper discussion of that, but that's what has happened in the last few weeks in Chemnitz. And again, in Köthen, where a similar issue has happened. And again, the far right instrumentalized the identities of the people involved to create a climate of anger and hate against refugees and Muslims in general.
Emily, thank you very much for the recounting of what has happened currently, but then also historically. Michaela, I would like to just have you talk about, if you could, and we've spoken about this in the past, after the last round of elections, we saw an increase in the number of ADF party members that were voted in, and we had a conversation about the fact that you know, there's the history of Germany, you know, and how it informs the current discussion. If you could talk about all of those interlinkings and how they're contributing to the current environment that you see happening, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, really, after 1945, I mean, it's not that all Nazis disappeared in Germany. So, I mean, they had the jobs, you know, I mean, the ones who were, they could be found to have done atrocious things, that they were prosecuted, but just, you know, your General German was still he living here, but of course it was not considered okay to talk about this anymore and to raise any right-wing ideas and stuff. And but I mean, my opinion is that it never really went away, you know, which all marginalized groups are still feeling, you know, on a basis of institutional racism or and everyday racism, really, also still in the language in Germany and certain ideas. And I think because of the influx of, I mean, maybe it started with the recession, of course, what Eminem mentioned, also with the fall of the Berlin Wall. You know, there were discrepancies between East and West Germany and stuff, which also contributed, I guess. And the influx of refugees in 2015 sort of gave people like the AfD a tool to mobilize their people, you know, riding on the fear factor. And actually Frankfurt is the best example that there is no need to fear, because we have 51% Germans in Frankfurt with an immigrant background. and we have the lowest rate of AfD voters in the last election, which proves everything, that that you can live beautifully, everybody together. And actually in the part of Germany where there are the fewest refugees and immigrant Germans have the highest numbers of AfD voters, and so they're really instrumentalizing the fear for their own party politics, and yeah. So and this has increased over the last, I mean, it's like a free ticket to suddenly, use old words again, like Lügenpresse and all this, against journalists who are bringing out the truth about things that the AfD is doing, or the Nazis, the right-wing populists. And also now in Chemnitz, part of that was also that many journalists were attacked during the demo, the right-wing demo, and also many politicians have. I mean, there have been, of course, politicians outspoken against that behavior and against the right-wing populism and stuff. But shockingly, there were enough politicians, or still, they're arguing, no, this didn't happen. And there was a video showing up online of showing of refugees or non-white Germans being haunted down the street in Chemnitz, and the word is, oh, this was doctored, this is not a real video and stuff. And the director of the Verfassungsschutz, which is, what is that in English? Oh, I mean, do you know what is that? Is he the?
I would call it like it's difficult to describe.
One of the. Hang on, sorry.
I mean, what you're talking about in terms of the messages in this particular video that we spoke of before is that it was doctored, and it was social media was used particularly in that case to promote this message of hate and incite violence. No,
it was the other way around. So it showed proof that people were hunted down the street. And then the right-wing populists said this was made up, this didn't exist, and especially, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, the head of that, still saying this, he didn't believe that happened and stuff. So really siding with the AfD and the right-wing populists, which is unheard of, I mean, as shocking. And I think today, for the Interior to decide if he needs to, I mean, he really should go, he should resign, but they're having a big discussion about it. I don't know what's there to discuss, I mean, yeah.
So I would, what you both have shared in regards to the history of what is happening in Frankfurt and also in Germany as a large, that have contributed to the rise of the far right, I think is incredibly important in the discussions that we're having within the Women's March Global European community, but then also generally as a whole, because many people don't know how deep these situations go, and the fact that they are happening almost on a weekly basis. One of the things that I would also like to talk about that's noted on the slide is the police actions and the questionable police actions, specifically as they're relating to what we are seeing right now, the over thousands of protectors that are trying to stop a coal mine. So if you could just speak to what's happening with that, I think that's incredibly important to share.
Yeah. So the Hambacher forest that's the name of the forest that is being actually there were protesters for years now that tried to raise awareness about the situation there and tried to prevent the big companies to destroy the forest. But in the last days it really escalated. There were videos about how the police really violently attacked peaceful protesters that were doing nothing wrong. They were just using their right of civil disobedience, right, as activists, as peaceful activists. And so that's not the only issue we see. Like, we have it in a lot of anti-racist, anti-fascist demonstrations, that the left, the radical left, how it's being called, is being very stigmatized, while the radical far right is being normalized by the comments of politicians, as well as by the actions of the police. So there were so many protesters, so many Nazis in Chemnitz, but we didn't see any of those demonstrators that were openly doing the Hitler salute, which is forbidden in Germany, being dealt the way that these peaceful protesters in the forest have been dealt with. And that's like, if you really put that on a like, if you consider these two, and you see that there's something fatally going wrong, which also raises the questions, and there have been evidence in the last years as well, like how many people in the police departments across the country are actually aligning themselves with the ideology of the far right in Germany.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, that the difference in treatment between peaceful protesters and then far right protesters that are doing things specifically to incite violence and or hate. And we see this in regards to peaceful protesters, and especially water protectors and protectors of this planet, indigenous communities, from Kinder Morgan protesters to Standing Rock, to in Louisiana, to the Amazon, to so many places, and in Germany, that are being treated and brutalized for standing for the rights of a healthy planet for every single person. And so I think it's important to make those links, that this is not an isolated incident, and we are seeing the rise of the silencing of these activists worldwide. I would like to talk to you now, both in terms of, we've spoken about the rise of the far right, but specifically now talking about Islamophobia. And Michaela, you mentioned this as well in terms of the refugee influx in 2015 and what that has caused. But if you could speak to what you are seeing in Germany and Frankfurt specifically with Islamophobia, that would be great.
I guess Emine probably can say much more about this. Yeah, maybe Emine, you
maybe you can start and I can jump in afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting, because when Emine and I did a speech together at a anti-AfD demonstration a few weeks ago. Where she spoke about as a kid growing up in Germany in school, and maybe her mom or other Muslim girls experiencing abuse by fellow students, and that, for instance, with Emine, then she didn't want to join a school trip, but then that was interpreted by the school as, oh, her autocrat family doesn't want her to go onto the school trip, So and we shared this also at the demo. And then actually, I thought it was quite moving. A teacher came up to us, and he was really moved by Emine, and what we shared, and he said, wow, he'd never seen it from that perspective, that maybe the girls don't want to join because they're being abused all the time by their fellow classmates. But most about certain
Do you hear the same back connection from?
Yes, so, Emily, if you could pick up what Michaela was saying, that would be great.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
like she told about some experience I had at school, and the thing is, like, the terms Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism arrived very late into the German discourse, because actually that kind of anti-Turkish, anti-Muslim racism was always there. It started with the first so-called guest workers, but in that period we were only the foreigners, the guest workers, the Turks. So there was a very specific anti-Turkish racism that was linked to anti-Islam sentiments. But after the years, after 9/11 and the years to come, and different topics globally and Europe-wide on Islam per se as a threat to the idea of an enlightened Europe, suddenly we were not Turks anymore, we were all Muslims. So everyone who was not white or Christian or atheist has become a Muslim. And that's the same discourses we are having with the refugees that arrived in the last years. They are all Muslim, whether or not they are actually identifying as Christian or somewhat else. The topics, the political discussions we have been having for 10 years now were really highly concentrated on Islam, war on terror, on how Muslim women are suppressed, on how Islam brings patriarchy and anti-Semitism and homophobia and transphobia back to Germany, such as Germany is free actually from these things, but the Muslim migrants are bringing them back to us. And that's how the discourses are working right now, because we see, for example, right-wing organizations or organizations, feminist organizations that are instrumentalizing right-wing ideas, such as Terre de Femme, trying to push campaigns forward that forbid young girls to wear the hijab in school, with the argument that they are trying to protect them, completely ignoring the fact that policies that forbid young women or women in general to wear the hijab in different contexts are, first of all, stigmatizing them, criminalizing them, and oppressing them. So that is something that did not start with the AfD. That is something that other parties before the AfD were also using a lot, especially during the campaigns for the election campaigns, for example. So since my childhood, and I'm 28 years right now, I remember constantly having these discourses again and again and again. So we are actually speaking about a renewed mobilization of Islamophobia, I would say.
And we see this renewed mobilization of Islamophobia in Europe in a much wider context. In France, in terms of policing of Muslim women, in Austria with the closing of mosques, in the UK as well. We see the policing of Muslim women happening at a much larger rate, and also Muslim people just generally. And it is increasing, as you said, Emily, mobilizing in a much bigger way throughout Europe, which is extremely worrying. So this is definitely something that we as a Women's March Global community within Europe are really looking at as well, and discussing you know, how we can organize to really address this. In terms of I think I just went backwards there. In terms of what you have been doing as a chapter and as a network, I would really love if you are able to talk about some of the events that you have done in the past to address some of these issues, and how you as a chapter and chapter ambassadors are engaging with your local community to really facilitate these discussions.
Yeah, for International Women's Day, for instance, we did a great event together with 3 organizations. Damigra organization, who is an organization for migrant women in Germany, and in their Frankfurt chapter. And then there is a Protestant women's center in Frankfurt that does great work, and then the Historical Museum, who's just opened an exhibition about the election, you know, the voting rights, 100 years of voting rights in Germany, celebrating right now. And and we did something called the Mitmachbuffet, where we invited all women from migrant backgrounds and to share their experiences, their expertise, and that strategies about voting participation, maybe what their experiences were, what perhaps when they were coming from another country, what they could bring to the table, what could be maybe improved in Germany, and to just have a big round table to discuss and share those experiences and strategies to move forward. That was greatly received, and yeah, and then we did, so we focused mainly on doing events together with other groups, just to form coalitions, as we said before. And then also we are a fairly small team, so of 7 members. And so the next one was Rock gegen Rechts, which you can see here on the screen. That was organized by many. It was a very broad alliance of groups and organizations. Mainly, many unions were involved, and organizations. And we participated in that too. And that was just on the 1st of September, which is the German Day of Peace and Solidarity. We're celebrating that on the September 1st, not the International Day of Peace, which is, I think, on the 14th, 15th, something like that. And yeah, so there were 15,000 people there in Frankfurt, listening to many bands and stuff. So that was the last thing we did. Yeah.
That's absolutely amazing. And I think, I think every single action is, and Michaela, as you said, that idea of coming together and just holding space for dialogue is so incredibly crucial. And Emily, you also touched on this as well, that the mobilization of Islamophobia and also the right wing is happening at such a fast rate. And if we don't actually create these spaces for dialogue and engagement and connectivity to happen, then we are allowing it to continue and grow, which is not something that we want as a network. Now, Michaela, you are actually going to be in Switzerland this coming weekend and participating in an action with Women's March Geneva and Women's March Zurich. And so I would love for you to just introduce what's happening on Saturday and what the action is about.
Yeah, and on Saturday the 22nd in Bern in Switzerland is a huge demo to raise awareness about the gender pay gap, and especially in the German-speaking European parts, we are not very advanced with the equal pay, and so I will join my lovely colleagues from Zurich and Geneva to raise awareness, and we're going to do a little bit of heating up the crowd. And it's impeccably organized. I'm so impressed by the Swiss. So I look very much forward to that, to be part of that. So well, if you have friends in Bern or in Switzerland, there are free trains bringing you from, I think, from Geneva, from Zurich, from Basel maybe as well, to Bern on Saturday. So mobilize your friends and come out for equal pay.
I want to thank you, Michaela, and you, Emily, for joining us from Women's March Frankfurt. I really hope that for all of you watching and that will watch this webinar, that you have learned a little bit about what is happening currently in Germany through our amazing chapter ambassadors, but then also get involved. If you're in Frankfurt, meet Emily and Michaela, and please link up with them. We have put a link in their Facebook Live discussion for their chapter page, and please feel free to connect with them. And you can find the contact details on their chapter page. on that link. Also, you can find the link for the upcoming event on Saturday that Michaela will be speaking at, that is being attended also by Women's March Geneva and Zurich, on the Facebook Live discussion. Thank you to you both for joining us, and thank you for the amazing work that you are doing in Frankfurt.
Thank you for having us.
Can I also give a shout out to our other organizers, Barbara Chapp, who's doing incredible work, and Karol von Janowski, Kirsten Kerstner, and Dorsey Bushnell, and Götz Hoffmann. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. So thank you. We're a great team. So
thank you so much. So I want to end this webinar by just saying that this is a week-long series of webinar discussions that we are holding with our fantastic community of organizers and partners. Tomorrow we will be bringing you a webinar with Women's March Buenos Aires, which I'm very excited about, to talk about the Aborto Legal Ya action, and also discussions around the IMF. So please join us tomorrow for that discussion. I want to present to you now, every single day this week, we're going to be releasing our hero of Women's March Global. Yesterday, we shared with you the video of Crystal from Women's March Taipei. And today, I'm really honored to introduce you to Honorine from Women's March Paris. We hope that you have enjoyed this webinar. If you have any questions for Women's March Global or Women's March Frankfurt, feel free to message us or leave your comments in the Facebook Live discussion chat, and we will address them accordingly. Thank you so much.
C'est Honorine Boudimon, j'ai fait partie de Women's March Paris, car je vis à Paris en France, et aussi de Women's March Global, donc le groupe dans lequel Women's March Paris fait partie, car les valeurs que moi je défends et celles contre lesquelles je me bats sont aussi bien représentées dans Women's March Paris que dans Women's March Global. Donc j'espère que vous pourrez bientôt tous nous joindre, so join us.